In this video, we're going to talk about the absolute best settings that you need to change on your brand new DJI Osmo Action 6 in order to get the best possible image quality out of it, because this camera is honestly capable of a lot. The Osmo Action 6 is also the world's first ever action camera with a variable aperture, so your settings and what you need to tweak will definitely look a lot different on this camera than previous DJI Osmo Action cameras. DJI has also introduced a new 1:1 aspect ratio, which we'll talk about in just a second on the brand new Action 6, which is not available on their other action cameras. So the way that you frame and reframe your videos in post is also going to look a lot different on this action camera. Usually I say that most of my settings videos will apply to previous generations, but the Osmo Action 6 has really broken the mold in terms of what the settings look like for DJI action cameras. So while most of the settings will still apply, there's a bunch of new specific settings that will only be applicable to the Osmo Action 6. And because of those new changes with the variable aperture and the custom aspect ratio, the color and exposure output on this camera does look a little bit different, with a tiny bit of extra dynamic range compared to past Osmo Action cameras. And with that being said, I've upgraded and changed my LUTs so that they go ahead and fit this new action camera. So if you're interested in getting the exact same look that you're seeing on the videos on screen right now, then I will leave a link below in the description for you to go check out those updated LUTs. Now, without any further ado, let's dive into the settings for the DJI Osmo Action 6 so you can get out there and start filming like a pro and get the absolute best cinema quality footage out of this action camera. Okay, so in order to get started, the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna swipe up from the bottom, and then traditionally we change the resolution first, but we're actually gonna change the aspect ratio first. So you wanna click the middle icon of the 3 at the top, and then you're gonna go over and change your aspect ratio to custom. Now this is new to the Osmo Action 6. This has never been in any other DJI action camera before. And when you change your aspect ratio to custom, you're gonna notice that your screen looks like this. So the camera is actually going to be recording the entire sensor. So this is that 1:1 aspect ratio, and this is what gives you that square look. And this is gonna allow you to reframe your video in post. So you can adapt it for vertical or landscape, whatever you want. This is the ultimate flexibility that you've ever had on any action camera before. And it's very similar to something like OpenGate, even though it's not exactly the same thing, but it's very, very similar. Now, once you have your aspect ratio selected, you're gonna swipe up from the bottom once again, and now you're gonna notice that the only resolution option that you have is 4K, which is great. We film all of our videos in 4K, and once we have that set, we're gonna go ahead and change our frames per second. Now, you have a couple of different options to play around with here. I predominantly only use 3. The first one being 24 frames per second. I film 90% of my videos in this frames per second mode because 24 frames per second is just the most cinematic. That's what your movies and videos that you see in the cinema look like, and we want our videos to look cinematic. So 90% of the time I'm using 24 frames per second. Your next option is going to be to use 30 frames per second. Now, traditionally most social media apps like Instagram, TikTok are optimized for 30 frames per second. So if that's your main output and the kind of content that you want to create, you can go ahead and pick 30 frames per second. And then finally, the last frames per second option that I usually consider is 60. So if you know that you're going to be slowing down your footage in post and you want to go ahead and slow it down and get that nice buttery smooth slow-mo, then I would go ahead and pick 4K 60. That's the only time that I use 60 frames per second, when I know I'm going to go slow something down. But otherwise, literally, like I said, 90% of the time I'm using 24 frames per second. Okay, cool. With that out of the way, the last thing we're going to change on this screen is by clicking in the top right, and this is going to take us to our stabilization option as well as this sort of lens that we want adapted to our camera. Now, for stabilization, I always have rock steady turned on, and there are some other options like horizon balancing, horizon steady if you don't want the horizon to change, but personally I think that looks a little bit unnatural, so I just leave mine on rock steady, and the stabilization has been absolutely amazing the whole time that I've ever used it on a DJI Osmo Action camera. So that's the one that I recommend. However, if you are flying FPV, you need to stabilize your footage in post, and that's something that's really important to note. So if you are flying FPV, make sure that you have rock steady turned off. If you're not flying FPV, make sure you have it turned on. Next up, you have your field of view options. Now you have standard D-warp, you have wide, you have ultra wide, you've got native wide, a bunch of different options. Traditionally, I've always used wide on DJI Osmo Action cameras. Personally, to me, they look like they're the most natural, and they also have the most flexibility in post in terms of stabilization. It lets you crop in without distorting anything that much. So I would go ahead and pick wide. Also, if you're flying FPV with the stabilization turned off. You will also need to select wide in order to be able to stabilize in post in gyro flow. So regardless of what you're filming, I would just leave this on wide. Now real quick, I do want to talk about this video sponsor, which is Artlist. And Artlist recently just added the Kling 01 video model to their vast roster of AI models. And this thing is absolutely insane. It lets you create these absolutely beautiful animations just using 2 screenshots, which would not have been possible otherwise, or would have taken you a really long time in After Effects. In fact, I actually used 2 of those video transitions at the beginning of this video, and I'm going to play those right now as you're listening to this. But I'm going to show you how you can create those transitions using Artlist and the new Kling 01 video model, and it's incredibly easy. Now, in order to create these transitions on Artlist, all you have to do is head over to artlist.io, select AI video, and then select image to video, and make sure you have the Kling 01 video model selected. Then all you have to do is just feed in your 2 frames, your beginning frame and your ending frame, for where you want your transition to begin and where you want your transition to end. So I already have these screenshots. All you do is just drop them into the platform just like this, and then you just need to type in a prompt for the type of animation that you want. Now personally, this is where I get a little bit creative and cheat. I kind of just feed those same 2 images to ChatGPT, and then I ask it to create a prompt for me for the Kling 01 video model. Then I just simply copy the prompt, I head back over to Artlist, I hit paste, and then I hit animate, and then Artlist just simply creates the transition for me. And if I like what I see, then I can go ahead and also upscale it to 4K and have the best possible resolution. And that's it. You can start creating animations just as easy as that using the new Kling 01 video model on artlist.io. So if that's something that you're interested in, there will be a link in the description below for you to go check that out. Once again, huge thanks to Artlist for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to our camera settings. Okay, now after changing those settings, you want to head back into your main screen, and then you want to select this gear icon on the right, and that's going to open up this entirely new menu. Now the first thing you want to go ahead and change is exposure. Now you want to head under exposure, and then you can have the option for auto or manual on the right side. I personally shoot everything in manual. Now the first thing we're going to want to go ahead and change is our shutter speed. Now in order to make sure that everything looks nice and cinematic, you want to go ahead and pick the 180-degree shutter rule, which basically just means that your shutter speed needs to be double your frame rate. So because 90% of the time I shoot in 24 frames per second, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that my shutter speed is 1/50. Now similarly, if you're shooting in 30 frames per second, you can set this at 1/60, and if you're shooting at 60 frames per second, you can go ahead and set this at 1/120. Now for your ISO range, DJI actually allows you to pick a set ISO or a range of ISOs, and personally because of that, I go ahead and pick the range of 100 to 800. This allows you to have the best combination of maximum exposure but the best quality. I find that most action cameras made by DJI don't introduce any real noise until you're past 800. So as long as you're in the range of 100 to 800, you'll be able to adapt to different situations and have the right exposure without introducing too much noise. After changing these settings, you might realize that your image is a little bit overexposed. Now, if that's the case, you're gonna need something that's called ND filters, and basically these are just like sunglasses for your camera, and they go on top of your lens and they help manage exposure. Now, DJI does make their own ND filters, and those are the ones that I'm using, but you can just head over to Amazon and select from a ton of different options. I'll leave links below for the DJI ones, as well as some budget options that I think that are really good. But if you're just getting into filmmaking and you want to take it a little bit more seriously, I would say that ND filters are an essential part of this process. Next up, we have white balance. And for white balance, honestly, I just leave this on automatic for most DJI OSMO action cameras. I think they do a fantastic job of selecting the right white balance. Following white balance, we have color, which is honestly one of my favorite parts. And once you click color, you're gonna have a ton of different options. So you have normal 10-bit as well as D-Log M 10-bit. Now, personally, I film everything in D-Log M 10-bit, and this gives you the maximum possible dynamic range and the ability to go ahead and change your colors in post. Now, obviously, the caveat to that is that you need to know how to color grade and how to adjust your footage in post. Now, if you don't know how to do that and you want a really easy one-click solution, not to worry, because I do have a link in the description for my LUTs. You can go check it out. They are paid. It's only $5 for the DJI Osmo Action 6 LUT, and I really geared it and adapted it for this camera, and I think you won't be disappointed because the colors coming out of this camera are absolutely insane. So if you want a really quick color grading shortcut, make sure you definitely check out those LUTs in the description below. Now, one more thing I do when shooting in D-Log M 10-bit, you might have noticed on the right side it says color recovery. I make sure that color recovery is turned on. All that does is that it's just really a monitoring tool. It lets you see what the image is going to look like when 10-bit D-Log M is converted to Rec 7 or 9. It doesn't really change the colors or the file that you're going to get at the end. The file is still going to be in log. This just helps you look on your screen with a little bit of color, which can be helpful when you're out shooting in the wild. Now, if you don't want to deal with any of this and you don't want to do any kind of color grading, but you want the best color image possible, just go ahead and pick normal 10-bit. It's still 10-bit color, so you're getting a ton of color information and you don't have to do any kind of color grading, which can be nice in a run and gun situation. The next thing we're going to change is the variable aperture on our Osmo Action 6, and this is the only action camera in the entire world that has a variable aperture. This is usually reserved for professional cameras. Now, under variable aperture, you're going to have a couple of different options. You've got standard, hyperfocal, classic, and starburst, and let's walk through a few of these. Now, 90% of the time you're going to be using standard, and what that does is that it keeps the aperture between f2 and f3. f2 is the brightest aperture on this camera, so the camera is most wide open at f2. So this is the one that's going to allow you to capture the most light possible, and that's the one that I leave it on 90% of the time. Hyperfocal keeps your aperture between f2.6 and f4, and personally I don't really use this one because I find the next two are a lot more useful. The third option is classic, which fixes your aperture at f2.8. So if you have plenty of light around you, this is actually the one that I would use because I find the camera is actually sharpest at f2.8, and that's just my personal opinion, but I do find in most of my testing that that is pretty accurate for DJI Osmo Action cameras. So I would leave it on classic if you have enough exposure and you're looking for maximum sharpness. And finally, we have starburst. Now, starburst locks your aperture at f4, and I would use this if you've already changed all of your exposure settings, you've put on your ND filter, and the image is still too bright. This is the absolute last thing that you can do to try and bring down the exposure, and that's when I use starburst. If I find that the image is still really bright, I'll go ahead and stop down to f4, which is really, really valuable, and I haven't been able to do that in any other action camera, so it's really cool to see. But like I said, 90% of the time I'm using standard. I'm allowing the camera to automatically change the aperture between f2 and f3. You're not gonna see any major exposure changes on screen, and you're gonna make sure that the most ideal aperture is selected for most of the time. And finally, under this menu, the last thing we have is image adjustment, and this is the secret sauce for a lot of DJI Osmo Action cameras that people don't know about to get them to look less digital. Now, the first thing you're gonna want to do is you're gonna want to change your texture to -2. Texture is just basically sharpness. This removes all that extra digital sharpness because we don't want that in our footage, and it's a lot easier to add sharpness in post than it is to take it away. And the other option we have is noise reduction. Now, I leave this at -1. I don't bring it all the way down to -2 because I do want a little bit of noise processing done in camera just to make sure that the image out of the box is ready to go, but I don't want it to be overly processed. So I just leave this at -1. I don't turn it all the way off at -2, and I found that this combination of settings has worked really well for me over the years. Now, one more secret setting that a lot of people don't talk about on DJI Osmo Action cameras is that if you scroll down from the top and then you click the settings gear icon and then you scroll down a little bit more, you should get to bitrate. Now, you want to make sure that your bitrate is set to high and not standard. This will allow the camera to capture the most possible data when it's filming, and it'll give you the best quality image. So make sure that your bitrate is set to high. You will need the right memory card, and this will take up more storage, but it's definitely worth it in my opinion. And that's it. Those are all the settings that you need to change on the brand new DJI Osmo Action 6 in order to get the best possible image quality out of this camera. Hopefully you got what you were looking for from this video, but that's it for this one, and I'll see y'all in the next one. And until then, keep creating.